Now, he wanted to focus on the economy, but as the French President Francois Hollande faced the press today, all most people wanted to know about was his tangled love life. The president, though, was having none of it. This was, he declared, neither the time nor the place to talk about such ordeals. But he pointedly refused to say who his First Lady actually is. The incumbent, his partner Valérie Trierweiler, remains in hospital where she's been since claims about his alleged affair with an actress emerged in a gossip magazine. Our foreign affairs correspondent, Jonathan Rugman, is in Paris. Jonathan.
Kathy, things have reached a pretty pass when this French president would rather talk about the French economy with unemployment stuck at around 11% than he would talk about his own private life. Bit of a devil's choice, really. But that's what Mr. Hollande tried to do for more than 2.5 hours this afternoon, fending off questions. As for Valérie Trierweiler, well, she's been left rather hanging by a thread, because we don't know if she is France's First Lady tonight, and quite possibly she doesn't know either, because she's still in hospital recovering from the ordeal, though the president said he would clarify her status before an official visit to the United States next month. As for the French public, well, they could be forgiven for wishing and hoping that if only the French president could kick-start the economy here as easily as that security guard started that moped. In the gilded halls of his palace, a French president reasserting the dignity of his high office. The French press standing in deference for Francois Hollande.
C'est que cette croissance soit la plus vigoureuse possible.
For much of the next 45 minutes, he delivered a lecture about croissance. Croissance, which means growth, rather than the croissants he reportedly shared the morning after his alleged visits. Until this.
Monsieur le Président de la République.
A French journalist daring to ask if Valérie Trierweiler was still France's First Lady. And from the head of state, you could almost hear a pin, a rolling pin, drop.
Je comprends votre question.
I understand your question, and I am sure that you will understand my answer. Every one of us in our personal lives can go through ordeals. This is what we are going through now. These are painful moments, but I have one principle, and it is that private matters are dealt with in private and in a respectful intimacy of each other. So this is neither the time nor the place to do this.
Hollande's stewardship of the economy has made him the most unpopular president most of his people can remember. What if he woke up at last, is the headline here. And now he's the subject of this online video game. The president may also have to decide which woman to wake up with. To his many critics, the turmoil in his private life is just a mirror to his political weakness.
He didn't marry Madame Trierweiler, and it's unlikely that he will marry Miss Gaillet. And there's a feeling that he cannot commit to anything, or he cannot commit to a tax policy, or he cannot commit to any numbers of political decisions. So this reinforces his bad image, I should say.
So in American political terms, he would be called a flip-flopper.
Yep, shilly-shally, flip-flopper, that's him.
This is where the president should have stopped short. Round the corner from the Élysée Palace, this the route to Julie Gaillet, an actress. The president admitting today that he would not sue the magazine which broke the story. The photographic giveaway, the president's shoes, which he'd apparently been wearing on a state visit to Saudi Arabia the day before. It's taken me less than a minute to drive from the garden entrance of the Élysée Palace to the agreed rendezvous here in the Rue du Cirque, or Circus Street. The problem for President Hollande is that he looks even more ridiculous than I do. The man with the power to press France's nuclear button has been reduced to a figure of fun. Perhaps not so much for having an affair as for failing to keep it secret. And the cartoonists are busy. First Lady, it says, but last to be informed. The man in charge at this satirical magazine claims to dislike this British tabloid-style saga. The French presidency's descent from the near sacred to the profane.
If they put their private life in the as a public matter, okay, well, it's their game, but we do not do that.
Français ou étrangers puissent
Francois Hollande stood his ground for over 2.5 hours, denying his personal security had been compromised, claiming his partner, Valérie Trierweiler, was resting and that his indignation at the media intrusion was complete.
Mais mon indignation est totale.
And when a French president would rather talk about his country's economy than his private life,
Merci.
well, then you know what deep trouble he's in. Jonathan Rugman, Channel 4 News, Paris.
Well, joining me now is the editor of the French daily newspaper Le Monde, Nathalie Nougaret. Nathalie Nougaret, by sidestepping the questions on the affair today, Francois Hollande surely ensured that this story will run and run, won't it?
Yes, absolutely. This press conference was always going to be a hurdle for Francois Hollande, but obviously the scandal and speculations around his private life that appeared on the scene in the recent days became a major problem for him. And what he tried to do, and what clearly his entourage suggested that he do, is try to focus as much as possible this whole press conference on economic and social issues in France and France's role in the world. But there he was, having to answer the very first question, which was about his private life, and he had prepared an answer which was to say that these are private affairs, that he wouldn't comment, but he also did add that as he was traveling next month to the United States on a state visit to meet with President Obama, he was aware that he would have to clarify whether his current girlfriend, First Lady, would still be First Lady.
Well, the story's running pretty big here, as I'm sure you're aware, but when I look at the front of your paper today, I mean, there's a couple of lines on the front about the affair, which is destabilising the president, but then you have to look to page 8 or 9 before there's much more on it. Do you think you're downplaying it?
Actually, today's paper exactly had a big photo of Hollande. You're mentioning yesterday's paper. Today's Le Monde had a big photo of Hollande and was saying, you know, how can the president really protect his private life? And we had several pages inside the paper dedicated to this whole theme. We're not certainly not sidestepping the issue, but you know, it is true that in France there has been a tradition over the last decades of the media and serious newspapers not really prying or looking into high-level politicians' private lives, and I think this is going to change.
But do you think in the past you have been too deferential, you and other papers have been too deferential, given that in this instance, as in others, there is a clear public interest here in terms of the security and who owns the flat, etc.?
No, we've been looking into who owns the flat. We've actually investigated about that. And I understand it's sort of easy to sort of bash on the French press about how French politicians behave. But the French press has been trying to do its job on this with, it's true, a certain tradition of not going into exaggeration. I would also like to point out that there's a strange thing in French politics, which are these massive, very ceremonial presidential press conferences, which don't really happen in other Western democracies. It so happens that the French president very rarely comes out and takes a long stretch of time to express himself and take questions. And these exercises, I think, are too you know, presidential and not open enough to follow-up questions. And this is something that I think the French media also will have to look into more closely.